Mountains wait, rest in resplendent form, unmoved by misty clouds, rise to godlike heights out of ancient seas. Their certainty, noisy occupants of the valleys below, are but temporary residents of the earth, a dinosaur-like species, humanity but a single flicker in the stars of time. All symbols of its tattered triumph, bombs and bullets, books and buildings, all consequences of its empires, even its plenitude of poisons, destined for obliteration. Mountains wait, patient in their knowledge. Men and women must disappear. Earth settle into succulent silence, begin its work of evolution anew. My writing comes from the deepest drive to understand issues of war and peace, violence and compassion in America. I came to this out of being badly wounded in World War II, and therefore the books I have both published or have been published and the books that I'm writing have been means for me to understand what happened to me and what understands to a lot of people in this country who are hurt in war or hurt in violence. And I think what I've done is sort of unique in that not many people have really concentrated exclusively on this issue and tried to understand it. The 3 books that have been published are really a trilogy about these issues of war and peace in America. And I never started them as a trilogy, but that's just what it involved. And it's a real trilogy in a deepest kind of way. The first one, On Being Wounded, deals with me personally. What happened to me after I was hit in France by shrapnel.
In the Metz area, everything in the arsenal is used. Signal Corps pictures show the devastation wrought by General Patton's armor divisions as they batter their way forward yard by yard.
What I've done is trace through the impact of that wound on my life in terms of relationship to my parents, to my ex-wife, how it led essentially to me being out of touch with myself for many, many years, feeling many times as if I had an axe in my head where I was wounded and I wanted to take it out and strike the world with it. The book deals with all these terrible consequences of a wound. The second book that's been published is Beyond the Weapons of Our Fathers. And the second book broadens it out to what kind of family did I come from that allowed me, and in fact, stated in no uncertain terms that the duty of a young man in war was to be at war and not to be anywhere in the Army, but in combat. And it deals with my inheritance of what I would call the inheritance of the citizen soldier. My ancestors, beginning back in 1675 in war, were never hotshots or officers or generals or policymakers. They were grunts. All of them were grunts. What I do is I bring these ancestors into one room at one time. That's part of the book, but the most important part. And I have them all talk about war. And as it happened, as I worked on this book, I discovered I had an ancestor who was a pacifist, 1846 to 1848. Got a great statement by him written against the Mexican-American War. So it ends up that all these guys are in one room, that there are 2 of us, the pacifist and me, who are arguing against war, and the rest of them, even though They recognize war's obscenity, really say in the final analysis, my country, right or wrong.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
We have conclusively proven that a free people can successfully look after the affairs of the world. Let's not forget that we are fighting for peace and for the welfare of mankind.
The third book is Worshipping the Myths of World War II, and it moves from the individual and the family to the nation, why we so worship war as a country.
We're not fighting for conquest. We want peace and prosperity for the world as a whole.
Turning World War II into an icon, something that can't be touched, something that says war is glorious, that we had to do it, that the guys my age who fought it were the greatest generation.
The French flowed into the streets to welcome their liberators. Men, women, children, all deliriously happy that their nightmare under Nazi rule had finally come to an end.
And it takes those and treats them as myths. And with 50 to 60 million people killed, it can't be a good war. With the bombings we did, "131 German cities destroyed. General Curtis LeMay Jr. firebombing of Tokyo so that 100,000 people were killed in one night. Because World War II is so worshipped, it has allowed us to go into Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and all the nameless little wars between Panama, Lebanon, etc., and ad nauseum. The greatest generation I consider to be full of baloney. That's if I weren't, there are other words that are shorter that I might say, but I won't say them here. My generation failed, and this is in the book. My generation failed because it did not and was not capable of creating conditions of peace after the war. I believe that after World War II. I believe that quite strongly.
We want to see the time come when we can do the things in peace that we have been able to do in war.
Carry me home. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home.
Who's that singing like an angel?
It's Master Roy himself.
I grew up in the South till I was 9 years old in a feudal society. It's the only way you can think of it. You had a real class system with the upper middle class whites, upper income whites, those who own land or business or a Coca-Cola bottling plant with a lot of money, or own the farms and the cotton farms in Mississippi or Louisiana, the sugar farms in Louisiana. And then you had a very small middle class, doctors, dentists, lawyers owned the stores. Then you had this huge black class, but they weren't a class. They were a caste. And it was a pyramid that went up to the top. And on the base of the pyramid were, of course, these black people, this caste that had didn't have any rights at all. And so I grew up accepting that. my sensitivity to race did not start until after I came home from the war. And then you read that piece, I think, I read at University of Chicago. And what did it for me as much as anything else was A, being wounded myself, which suddenly made me sympathetic to other people that were hurt. And the other was taking the L in from Chicago to the Loop, from out near the university, 55th, or out over at 63rd, you'd walk over and catch it, and seeing how the most god-awful tenements in the world, I mean, these were wooden buildings that had never been painted, back porches that were falling down and back steps. And you knew that people lived there and were hungry, and you knew that. And so the race thing came from my real objection to what I saw in the South when I came home from the war. It started as a novel about my mother and my grandmothers. And then I just never got to, when I quit to go back to school, I did keep part of that. I didn't burn that for some reason. And I still got some of the original pages downstairs written in the 50s. And it was this deep drive. I mean, I used, from down here somewhere to, I can't explain it. You're a writer. You want to write about something. I can't explain it. I wanted to write about my family. And their struggles with these terrible issues of race and women's rights. Cora's piece is about a woman, Cora McCloyd Watson, in the Deep South from 1885 to 1917, who does her best to create a place of peace on her small farm, her husband's small farm in southeastern Mississippi, where African Americans are treated in that county, in that place, with, I think, a greater cruelty than they were treated in slavery times. They were economic slaves, essentially, with no rights of their own. She tries to give those people decent opportunities for the minimal life they could live in the South. She succeeds, and then she fails. Probably the oddest parade Cross Point, Mississippi had ever seen. Cora McCloyd Watson, her daughter, and her two grandsons, frantically searching for Robert Henry, the child of that rape so many years before. They rushed down Walter Street, turned near Mumford's lumber mill, pushed out of the pine forest into the live oaks, hurrying toward the 100-year-old tree where they lynched the niggers in Cross Point at the beginning of the 20th century. Finally, just at dusk, they saw lights flashing eerily through the black gnarled branches and the dull sheen of the old live oak, gray-green moss dancing in its beams. Oh, Lord, oh, that you stand by me, wherever I be. Oh, Lord, down and trouble me in my dying hour. Very well, very well, my friend down here, I got another waiting for me out there. Part of the tradition I've explored is my interest in Greek tragedy and in Shakespeare, in the sense of the tragic flaw within the person or the tragic reality outside the person, the idea that fate pursues you no matter what you do. I would say that Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Euripides were probably as strong an inheritance in my writing as anything else, particularly the idea of the chorus, which is a technical means to have a group of people come together and reflect on the overall theme of the piece of art.
World conquest,
by actions short of war. Actions that are political, economic, and ideological.
In all these ways, economically, militarily, morally, the world outside the communist orbit slowly draws itself together. The practical communists appraise this consolidation of free world defenses. It confronts them with a serious deterrence to their world ambitions. Hence, they must destroy Allied unity, or at least weaken it. How? Well, here we return to the subject of ideological penetration. For if all other forms of penetration don't work, if the united strength of the non-communist world makes political penetration unfeasible and economic penetration unsuccessful, if cultural penetration does not do the job, the communists can always hope to succeed by resorting to ideological warfare against their strongest opponent, meaning us.
This novel deals with that period from 1944 to, say, 1950s, early 50s sometimes, when a group of veterans, combat veterans from World War II, came to the University of Chicago, all very idealistic, and believed so naively at that time that they could help create a peaceful world. I was there in the spring of 45 when the United Nations was formed, and then we tried to do something like writing a world constitution, created a new veterans organization, the American Veterans Committee, to oppose the right-wing American Legion. And the book details, it starts with a scene in Burton Judson Court. It's across the way from the main campus, when all these guys, the fall of 45, January of 46, are in one room. And I just never realized then what that really meant. And we had no more idea in the world of what we had really done, except we knew that we had been involved in something pretty nasty and unpleasant, but that was going to influence our lives almost totally. Guys who came to the University of Chicago at that time, we weren't interested in making a buck. We were trying to discover why that war had happened. And I really want to deal with it in a fictional way because I want to introduce back going into the 30s and the kind of anti-communism that began to set up the Cold War, something we didn't know about at all. I want to be able to talk about betrayal, the struggle, how really some people came out for this world peace. I don't want to use names. And then they suddenly changed like that. And in the changing, they often betrayed people who they had been close friends before. And I can't use names, but I know these things happened. I saw them happen. And I would like to have the chorus be the persecutor, the House Un-American Activities Committee, the American Legion, the people who set this up. They're always doom out there. There's no way. You got my hand, there's no way you're going to escape my hand around your neck, boy.
Are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party?
Sir, I am 42 years of age and have never had to face a jury as defendant or grand jury as witness in my life. I have committed no crime under any of the laws of this country and am not engaged in subversion. I certainly shall not answer questions representing allegations against me made by persons not present and not identified, whom I cannot confront and whom my lawyer cannot cross-examine as to their truthfulness. Honorable beaters of children and sadists uniformed and in plain clothes, distinguished Dixiecrat wearing the clothing of a gentleman, eminent Republican who opposes an accommodation with the one country with which we must live at peace in order for us all and our children to survive. If you think that I am going to cooperate with this collection of Judases, of men who sit there in violation of the United States Constitution, if you think I will cooperate with you in any way, you are insane.
What we teach in high school and grammar school is I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, America the beautiful, the Star-Spangled Banner, patriotic myths about this country. And we don't talk about these people who said, no, I'm not going to do that. There have been a lot of them. And it's very important for us today to realize that there have been a lot of people in the United States who said, no, I don't want to do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Good evening, my fellow Americans.
My friends.
Good evening, my fellow citizens.
My fellow Americans.
My fellow citizens.
My fellow Americans.
My fellow Americans.
Fellow citizens.
Tonight I want to talk to you about the situation, dangerous to peace, which has developed in the Formosa Straits in the Far East.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba.
Renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin.
I want to talk to you today about the tragedy in Somalia and about a mission that can ease suffering and save lives.
Required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
Last night, I ordered U.S. military forces to Panama.
Today, our armed forces joined our NATO allies in airstrikes against Serbian forces responsible for the brutality in Kosovo.
This evening, I want to speak with you about an attack by the government of Iraq against the United States and the actions we have just taken to respond.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait.
To strike military and security targets in Iraq.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
There will be unintended Iraqi casualties.
I think with the kind of weapons we have today and the way those weapons destroy not the enemies on either side, but are so prone to destroy innocent civilians. You know, in Iraq, we don't know how many, hundreds of thousands. But they've also dislocated 3 or 4 million people. Who fled to Syria and Lebanon. I think as that grows, that maybe there's going to be a time when there'll be enough people to say no. After all, there were 10 million people who protested on one day about our entry into Iraq. Now, that's never happened before in the history of the world.
Thank you. There have been many remarkable things about this great movement for peace, but few of them have been more remarkable than the tremendous display of...
Well, the hopeful thing is, in 1871, in 1914, 1918, in 1939 to 1945, Germany and France and England were the bitterest enemies in the world. They slaughtered each other. I mean, that's the only word for it. Now they are in the European Union. They have the same currency. They don't need a passport to go back and forth anymore. That in itself is a huge leap ahead. And maybe, see, I think one more thing out of all this work I've done. I think this is the responsibility of the United States, not to make war, but to put an enormous effort into ways to lead people toward peace. And I don't, it's pretty obvious to me we're not doing that right now. As far as my own work is concerned, it's a drop in a drop in a little drop in a big bucket. And I think I'm just glad I could do that and make some drops into that bucket. In one way, it's very courageous. In another way, it's sort of, it's not courageous. Because my way of doing it has been to try and write as clearly about it as I can. And I haven't been to demonstrations much. And I'm a very private person. And this is my contribution. To write good books about this is just about all I can do. It's not the fear, my belly in my mouth, fetid breath, taste of cigarettes, 2, maybe 3 packs a day. It's not the lousy food, orders from some chicken shit colonel who's never been shot at in his life. It's not the loneliness, missing home, fooling around with Laurie in Dad's car, hanging out with the guys, drinking a beer, smoking a joint. It's the dead that bother me. So young, they'd be in school at home. Yet they kill, and our bombs kill them. Their bodies so scrawny, thin, fragile like a child's. Bones poke through yellow skin like tombstones in winter grass at home. Urine stains their pants. Shit draws flies. I vomit again. But the men aren't as bad as the women and babies. What can we do with dead babies? Bury them? Won't they crawl from their graves? Scream for eternity? The movies never told me it could be so bad. My recruiting officer never informed me. As for TV, it lies. It just plain lies. And I'll never tell anybody at home. They'd never believe me safe in their beds and bars.